The Cybermen are one of Doctor Who's most iconic enemies, second only to the Daleks. But which Doctor has fought them the most? Today we're going to look back at every Cyberman encounter, from full-on Cyberman stories to the briefest of cameos, in order to find the answer. But first, a couple of ground rules. Firstly, for the purposes of this video, we're only counting TV stories, so no Big Finish, no novels, no comics, etc. And we're not including montages featuring existing footage. Secondly, not every story to feature the Cybermen can be classed as a Cyberman story. For example, I don't think anyone would thank me if I gave Dalek and the Invasion equal footing. We'll therefore be separating Cyberman appearances into two categories. Full-on Cyberman stories, so any story where the Cybermen are the main antagonists, and Cyberman cameos, so any story where the Cybermen appear but are not the main focus. We'll begin by determining which Doctor has the most Cyberman stories, i.e. by just counting those in the first category, then expand our remit to the cameos to determine which Doctor has the most stories in which the Cybermen appear. Stories which are split across multiple episodes will be treated as one story. For example, Dark Water and Death in Heaven counts as one Cyberman story, not two. However, we also need to take the vastly differing runtimes of stories into consideration. Dark Water and Death in Heaven, for example, amounts to 105 minutes, over twice the length of the previous season's Nightmare in Silver. Similarly, classic Who Cyberman stories, which are predominantly split across 25-minute instalments, range from 75 minutes to a whopping 200. To this end, we'll conduct one further count, which ranks each era's Cyberman stories according to their accumulated runtimes. Admittedly, this method isn't perfect, since it takes into account an entire story's runtime rather than just the scenes in which the Cybermen feature, but in most cases, these discrepancies are not enough to affect the overall ranking. So without further ado, let's do some number crunching. The first Doctor had one Cyberman story, the 10th Planet. This amounts to 100 minutes of runtime. The second Doctor had four Cyberman stories, the Moonbase, the Tomb of the Cybermen, the Wheel in Space, and the Invasion. This amounts to 550 minutes of runtime. The third Doctor had no Cyberman stories. This amounts to 0 minutes of runtime. The fourth Doctor had one Cyberman story, Revenge of the Cybermen. This amounts to 100 minutes of runtime. The fifth Doctor had one Cyberman story, Earthshock. This amounts to 100 minutes of runtime. The sixth Doctor had one Cyberman story, Attack of the Cybermen. This amounts to 90 minutes of runtime. The seventh Doctor had one Cyberman story, Silver Nemesis. This amounts to 75 minutes of runtime. The eighth Doctor had no Cyberman stories. This amounts to 0 minutes of runtime. The ninth Doctor also had no Cyberman stories. This amounts to 0 minutes of runtime. The 10th Doctor had 3 Cyberman stories, Rise of the Cybermen / The Age of Steel, Army of Ghosts / Doomsday, and The Next Doctor. This amounts to 240 minutes of runtime. The 11th Doctor had 2 Cyberman stories, Closing Time and Nightmare in Silver. This amounts to 90 minutes of runtime. The 12th Doctor had 2 Cyberman stories, Dark Water / Death in Heaven, and World Enough in Time / The Doctor Falls. This amounts to 210 minutes of runtime. And finally, the 13th Doctor had 3 Cyberman stories, The Haunting of Villa Diodati, Ascension of the Cybermen / the Timeless Children, and The Power of the Doctor. This amounts to 255 minutes of runtime. And it remains to be seen whether the 14th or 15th Doctors will have any Cyberman stories. So to recap, which Doctor had the most Cyberman stories? In 5th place, we have the 3rd, 8th and 9th Doctors with no Cyberman stories. Thankfully, all three have since had Cyberman stories on audio with Big Finish. In 4th place, we have the 1st, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th Doctors with one Cyberman story. In 3rd place, we have the 11th and 12th Doctors with two Cyberman stories. In 2nd place, we have the 10th and 13th Doctors with three Cyberman stories. Which means, of course, that in 1st place, we have the 2nd Doctor with four Cyberman stories. We'll come back to the runtime ranking in just a moment, but first, on to Cyberman cameos. The Cybermen cameoed in no 1st Doctor stories. The Cybermen cameoed in one 2nd Doctor story. In Part 10 of the War Games, the 2nd Doctor gives a presentation to the Time Lords about some of the monsters he's faced, including the Cybermen. This brings the total number of Cyberman appearances in the 2nd Doctor's era to 5. The Cybermen cameoed in one 3rd Doctor story. In Carnival of Monsters, the Cyberman appears on the screen of Vorg's miniscope. This was the first time the Cybermen had appeared in colour. This brings the total number of Cyberman appearances in the 3rd Doctor's era to 1. The Cybermen cameoed in no 4th Doctor stories. The Cybermen cameoed in one 5th Doctor story. In the 5 Doctors, the Cybermen are brought to the Death Zone on Gallifrey, and an entire patrol is taken out by the ruthless Raston warrior robot. This brings the total number of Cyberman appearances in the 5th Doctor's era to 2. The Cybermen cameoed in no 6th or 7th Doctor stories. The Cybermen cameoed in one 9th Doctor story. In Dalek, a revenge-style Cyberman head is on display in Van Statten's museum. This brings the total number of Cyberman appearances in the 9th Doctor's era to 1. The Cybermen cameoed in no 10th Doctor stories, although they did very nearly appear at the end of Journey's End. The Cybermen cameoed in 3 11th Doctor stories. In The Pandorica Opens, the Pandorica is guarded by a Cyberman sentry, which has lost its head and left arm. 3 Cybermen, including a Cyber leader, appear at the episode's end as part of the alliance assembled to imprison the Doctor. These Cybermen subsequently turn to stone as a result of history collapsing when the TARDIS explodes. In A Good Man Goes to War, Rory, seeking answers about Demon's Run, interrogates the 12th Cyber Legion, which the Doctor then proceeds to blow up. And in The Time of the Doctor, during the siege of Trenzalore, a wooden Cyberman attempts to enter the town of Christmas undetected. This brings the total number of Cyberman appearances in the 11th Doctor's era to 5. The Cybermen cameoed in 2 12th Doctor stories. In Face the Raven, the Cyberman is revealed to be among the inhabitants of Trap Street, tended to by an Ood. And in Hellbent, both Cybus and Nightmare and Silver style Cybermen are present in the Gallifreyan cloisters. This brings the total number of Cyberman appearances in the 12th Doctor's era to 4. And finally, the Cybermen cameoed in 2 13th Doctor stories. In Once Upon Time, in the aftermath of the first Flux Wave, Belle travels through the Cyber Sector and successfully defends her ship from a Cyberman attack. And in The Vanquishers, the Cybermen, together with the Daleks, are duped by the Sontarans into being destroyed by the Flux. And before someone says it, I know that some people count all 6 chapters of Flux as one story, so technically this could just count as one cameo, but personally I'm counting it as 2. This brings the total number of Cyberman appearances in the 13th Doctor's era to 5. So which Doctor's era has the most Cyberman appearances? i.e. the most stories in which the Cybermen appear. In 5th place, we have the 1st, 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th and 9th Doctors with 1 story each. In 4th place, we have the 5th Doctor, now with 2 stories. In 3rd place, we have the 10th Doctor, still at 3 stories. In 2nd place, we have the 12th Doctor, now with 4 stories. And in joint 1st place, we have the 2nd, 11th and 13th Doctors, with 5 stories each. And finally, which Doctor's era has the most Cyberman appearances in terms of runtime? In 10th place, we have the 3rd and 9th Doctors, with 1 cameo each. In 9th place, we have the 7th Doctor, with 75 minutes of Cyberman runtime. In 8th place, we have the 6th Doctor, with 90 minutes of Cyberman runtime. In 7th place, we have the 11th Doctor, with 90 minutes of Cyberman runtime plus 3 cameos. In 6th place, we have the 1st and 4th Doctors, with 100 minutes of Cyberman runtime. In 5th place, we have the 5th Doctor, with 100 minutes of Cyberman runtime plus 1 cameo. In 4th place, we have the 12th Doctor, with 210 minutes of Cyberman runtime plus 2 cameos. In 3rd place, we have the 10th Doctor, with 240 minutes of Cyberman runtime. In 2nd place, we have the 13th Doctor, with 255 minutes of Cyberman runtime plus 2 cameos. And in 1st place, once again, we have the 2nd Doctor, with a whopping 550 minutes of Cyberman runtime, plus 1 cameo. And just for fun, the accumulated runtime of every Cyberman story to date is 1,810 minutes. The total number of Cyberman stories so far is 19. And the total number of Cyberman appearances, or stories in which the Cybermen appear, is 30. So there we have it. The 2nd Doctor is, by all accounts, the one that has fought the Cybermen the most, with 4 Cyberman stories, 5 Cybermen appearances, and 550 minutes of Cyberman runtime. This figures since the Cybermen were arguably at their most popular and most topical in those early years. Perhaps more surprising is the fact that if we include cameos, the 11th and 13th Doctors also have 5 Cyberman stories to their name. If either Doctor had had one more Cyberman story or cameo, they would have overtaken the 2nd Doctor in this regard. But what do you think about these results? Which surprised you the most, or indeed the least? Which Doctors do you think should have had more, or indeed less, Cyberman stories? And more generally, which are your favourite Cyberman stories and Cyberman cameos? Whatever the case, be sure to let me know down in the comments. Please do give this video a like if you have enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you're new for more stuff like this in the future. And if you'd like to help keep the lights on, you can find the link to my Patreon page in the video description. But otherwise, until the next one, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye for now.